Last year, my sister did something I never thought she was capable of. After being handed the keys to our family company, she fired me. Without warning, without gratitude, without a second of hesitation. Her message was short and surgical. Your role has been dissolved. I remember that morning vividly. I was 38, walking through the glass doors of Lawson & Vale, the firm I had helped build from a two-person startup to a national brand. My heels echoed on the polished floors of our Chicago headquarters, my mind calm, expecting a routine quarterly strategy meeting. Nothing more. But when I stepped into the conference room, the air felt wrong. Gold and ivory balloons hung from the ceiling. A banner read, "A new era for Lawson & Vale." A small table was set with champagne and cupcakes. My stomach turned cold. At the head of the room stood my parents, our CFO, and the board. And beside them, radiant in a cream-colored suit, was Isla, my older sister. Her smile was practiced, poised, and sharp enough to cut glass. "Mara," my mother said too brightly. "So glad you could make it." I blinked, confused. "I scheduled this meeting." Then my father stood. His voice grand like he was giving a toast. "Today marks a new chapter for our firm. We're proud to announce Isla as the new CEO, effective immediately." Applause filled the room. I didn't clap. Couldn't. My throat tightened as the reality sank in. This celebration wasn't about the company's growth. It was about my removal. As the cheers quieted, Isla walked over, extending a manila folder toward me. Inside was a termination letter. The title across the top. Restructuring of executive roles. I stared at it, then at her. "You couldn't even tell me privately." She gave a small, pitying smile. "It's not personal, Mara. You've just outgrown your position." Grown. That word echoed like an insult. I had built this company from scratch. Signed the first lease, secured our first investors, even skipped my engagement party to save a client deal. Every milestone had my fingerprints on it. And now I was being erased with a single folder. I took the papers without looking at them and walked out, my heels pounding against the concrete like gunfire. When I reached my office, my badge light blinked red, access denied. A young assistant passed by, holding a box of my belongings, a framed photo of Mom and me, a pen Dad gave me when we signed the incorporation papers, my favorite mug. They'd planned everything, every detail. At home, I unpacked the box in silence. My fingers brushed against that same walnut pen, the one engraved with Mel. Dad had given it to me years ago, saying, "You're the future, Mara." I sat there, gripping it until my knuckles went white. Then my phone buzzed. A headline flashed across the screen. Lawson & Vale names first female CEO. A legacy continues. Legacy. My legacy. But as I dug through the box, my hand brushed against a hidden envelope I hadn't noticed before. Thick, embossed paper with my name written neatly on top. Inside was a notarized contract. And when I read what it said, my tears stopped cold. Buried inside that envelope was the one clause everyone forgot. A clause that meant I still owned part of the company they thought they'd stolen from me. My hands trembled as I unfolded the document. The paper was thick, official, and old, notarized 4 years ago. I recognized the signature at the bottom instantly. Isla's, written in her perfect looping script. The contract detailed a 10% non-dilutable ownership clause, created the night she had begged me to save the company from collapse. I remembered that night clearly. Isla had shown up at my apartment, her face pale with panic. "We're about to miss payroll," she'd said. "If the investors pull out, we'll lose everything." I didn't hesitate. I wired $250,000 of my own savings into the business that same night, the emergency fund that kept Lawson & Vale alive. In return, the clause guaranteed me permanent ownership, activated only if I ever voluntarily resigned. And I never had. The realization hit me like a current of lightning. They thought they'd pushed me out, but legally, I was still part of the company. The boardroom, the office, the brand, it was still mine. My tears dried instantly. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was calculating. I grabbed my laptop and the old navy blue folder I kept in my garage, the one labeled 2019. Emergency docs. Dust rose as I opened it. Tax returns, wire receipts, board memos, and email printouts from that same chaotic year. At the very back, taped to the inside cover, was a flash drive. When I plugged it in, a single audio file appeared. I clicked play, and heard Isla's voice, shaky but familiar. "Mara, I don't know how to thank you. You saved us. If I ever forget this, I shouldn't be in charge of anything. I listened again, slower this time. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. She had forgotten. Completely. I packed the contract, the flash drive, and my laptop into my old leather tote, the one Dad gave me when we closed our first deal. I wasn't going to sit at home and wallow. I needed to think, somewhere quiet, somewhere neutral. A small cafe on Halsted Street came to mind, a place where I used to plan product launches over green tea and cold sandwiches. It was nearly empty when I arrived. I chose a booth in the back, opened my laptop, and began gathering every piece of evidence I had ever touched. Internal memos with my name on them, investor decks I'd created, payroll documents I'd approved. With every file, my anger shifted into focus. This wasn't heartbreak anymore, it was strategy. Then, as if on cue, my inbox pinged. The subject line read, "I don't agree with what they did to you. We should talk." The sender was Dean Mercer, our firm's longtime accountant. Quiet, meticulous, invisible in meetings, but he had seen everything. I hesitated for barely a second before replying. An hour later, I was walking down a dim stretch of Lincoln Avenue toward Dean's office. The building was old, wedged between a fitness studio and a dry cleaner. Dean opened the door, his tired eyes soft but wary. "I'm glad you came," he said, gesturing toward a small table covered in USB drives and folders. "They told me to delete everything. Board minutes, voting rights, your ownership records." My stomach turned cold. "They wanted me to erase you," he added quietly. "But I didn't." He sat down, opened his laptop, and clicked a folder labeled Not Forgotten. A voice filled the room, Isla's, smooth and smug. "She was never meant to last. She's too emotional, too soft. We'll make it look professional." I didn't blink. I just stared at the screen as a deep, familiar fire began to rise inside me. Dean had more recordings, and one of them would expose the moment my own family decided to betray me completely. Dean sat quietly, his fingers hovering over the keyboard like he was afraid to go any further. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "I stopped being scared the day they locked me out of my office," I said. He nodded once, clicked play on another recording, and the sound of my mother's voice filled the room. "She's too emotional, Isla. We need someone more polished, someone who won't disappear when things get hard." The words hit me like a fist. I knew what she was referring to. That year I had disappeared because I was at the hospital, sitting beside my partner Blake as he fought stage 2 lymphoma. I took calls during chemo sessions, signed contracts from the waiting room, and stayed up all night fixing client accounts. They all knew it, and yet in their eyes that made me unreliable. The next recording was worse. Isla's voice again, cool and sure. "She's loyal to a fault. That's why she won't fight back. We'll handle the transition smoothly, and by the time she realizes it's done, it'll be too late." Dean pressed pause, his face grim. "Your dad hesitated, for what it's worth. But they convinced him this was for the best." I stared at the wall, not moving. There was a stillness in me that felt dangerous, the kind that comes before a storm. "You kept the originals?" "Yes." He nodded. "Every document, every vote record, every file they asked me to delete." "Why?" "Guilt," he admitted. "And fear. They wanted to bury you, Mara. I couldn't." I stood, pacing slowly across the room. The betrayal didn't feel sharp anymore. It was surgical, precise, almost predictable. "You don't have to do anything else," I said. "You've done enough." Dean handed me 3 USB drives. "Just be careful. They'll fight dirty." I gave him a small smile. "So will I." Back home I set the drives beside my laptop. My kitchen, once a place of late-night brainstorming and morning coffee, now looked like a war room. Evidence stacked neatly in folders, every file labeled, every receipt ready. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and created a new folder on my encrypted drive. Phoenix. That's what I named it. The Rebirth. Inside I began to piece everything together. Contracts, board notes, Isla's voice files. Every keystroke was deliberate, methodical, cleansing. They wanted to erase me, but I was writing myself back into the narrative. When I opened LinkedIn for the first time in 6 years, the platform barely recognized me. The empty profile blinked like an open door. I updated my headline. Former co-founder of Lawson and Vale. Strategist. Survivor. Within an hour, the messages started pouring in. Ex-colleagues, investors, consultants. But one name stopped me cold. Ethan Graves. His message was short and familiar. Still got that fire, Lawson? Let's build something new. Your name on the door this time. Ethan had been our quiet investor years ago, the only one who saw me for who I really was, not as Isla's shadow. His message felt like a spark in the ashes. 2 days later, I stood outside a sleek glass building in Chicago's River North District. The morning sun caught the steel edges of the architecture, casting sharp lines across the pavement. Inside, Ethan greeted me with a warm smile. There she is, he said. The ghost they couldn't bury. For the first time in weeks I felt something unfamiliar, hope. He introduced me to his partners, people who didn't avert their eyes when I spoke, who asked real questions, who listened. When he slid a folder across the table labeled Partnership Proposal, I didn't open it right away. I just let my fingers rest on it. I wasn't ready to sign yet. Not until I'd finished what I started. That night, back at my apartment, I reviewed one of Dean's drives again. A folder labeled Bridge Grant Terms. Signed. I didn't recognize the title. When I opened the PDF, my pulse spiked. My name was there, my signature too. But I had never signed this document. It wasn't my handwriting. And the person who forged it didn't just steal my job. They committed a crime that could bring the entire company down. I stared at the screen for a long time, my pulse hammering in my ears. The signature was mine, or at least it was meant to be. Same slants, same spacing, same neat letters. But the G in Lawson was wrong. Too tight, too perfect. Mine always looped open at the bottom. Whoever had done this didn't know that tiny detail. It wasn't a mistake. It was forgery. I reached for my old notebook, the one I used for grocery lists and travel plans. I flipped to the back, where my real signature repeated across old receipts and notes. The difference was undeniable. I took a deep breath and printed the document, each page sliding out of the printer like a confession. On the last page, my sister's name appeared beside mine. Isla Lawson, stamped bold and smug. I remembered her laugh from the last board meeting, that soft, self-assured sound she used when she thought she'd already won. I could almost hear her saying, "It's just business, Mara." Well, this was business too. Only now the rules had changed. I took out an envelope, carefully sliding the forged contract inside. On the front, I wrote in black ink, "To Illinois Office of Business Conduct. Confidential review." My hands didn't shake this time. I sealed it, pressed the flap flat, and sat back. My mind wasn't racing with anger anymore. It was focused, precise. They wanted me quiet, invisible, erased. Instead, I was about to be the loudest echo in their carefully constructed empire. The next morning, I stopped by the Cook County Clerk's office. The woman behind the plexiglass window barely looked up as I handed over the envelope. "All set?" she asked, stamping it. "Effective immediately," I replied. As she slid the papers into the outbox, I felt something settle deep inside me. A strange, heavy calm. Outside, the Chicago sky was gray and cold, but I felt light. Almost new. Back home, I brewed coffee and opened a folder labeled Family Trust Access. To my surprise, my login still worked. They hadn't revoked it. The system showed Isla listed as acting trustee. Power of attorney granted 2 months before she fired me. But I had my own copy of the original documents, which included a clause that required my written consent for any transfer of control. She hadn't gotten that. 1 click, 1 upload, and her authority was revoked. That evening, I went through my mother's old phone backups, something I had synced years ago while helping her set up a new device. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just distraction. But then I saw a voice memo dated 3 days before my firing. Press play. Isla's voice was crisp, confident, almost gleeful. "Mara's smart, sure, but she still believes loyalty matters. That's why I'll win. Mom and Dad know it too." Froze. Then I replayed it. Not anger this time, clarity. Cold and sharp. I saved the file under a new folder called Contingency Exposure and backed it up on 3 drives. That night, I opened my closet and pulled out a charcoal blazer I hadn't worn in over a year. I packed my laptop, the revocation documents, the flash drives, and that voice memo, burned onto a red-labeled CD, into my bag. Before leaving, I sent a copy of the memo to myself with a note in the subject line. "Only if she forgets." An hour later, I walked into the Lawson Foundation charity gala, uninvited but entirely undeterred. The chandeliers sparkled, the air filled with polite laughter and champagne chatter. Isla stood at the podium in a white gown, radiant under the spotlights, her name etched on every banner. Our company was built on trust, on legacy, and on knowing when to lead and when to step aside, she said smoothly. Her eyes flicked toward me. Some of us learn that better than others. The room laughed politely. I raised my glass and smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made her pause mid-sentence. She had no idea that while she basked in applause, the empire beneath her feet was already shifting. That night before the gala ended, Isla's world began to unravel, and I was standing close enough to watch the first cracks appear. The gala glowed with crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, and rehearsed laughter. Every corner screamed perfection, Isla's version of success. The banners read Lawson Legacy, a night of impact, her name gilded in gold letters beneath. I walked through the ballroom unannounced, dressed in quiet confidence and a charcoal blazer that fit like armor. First no one noticed me. Then whispers began. Heads turned, eyes widened. A few polite smiles froze mid-laugh. And then she saw me. Isla's expression didn't falter, but her posture stiffened ever so slightly, a single crack in her porcelain poise. She finished her speech and handed off the microphone, pretending not to care. But as she descended from the stage, she couldn't resist glancing back at me. I simply raised my glass in a silent toast. Her jaw tightened. I didn't plan to make a scene. I didn't have to. The paperwork I'd filed earlier that day had already started its quiet march through the system. Isla just didn't know it yet. As I passed through the coat check, I overheard the first murmurs. Access denied. That can't be right. Her trustee permissions were revoked this morning. The words rippled through the room like a tremor. Within minutes, Isla's assistant appeared at her side, whispering something urgent. Isla's confident smile cracked. She excused herself from a cluster of donors and hurried toward the exit, her heels clacking sharply against the marble. I followed a few paces behind, my steps calm and deliberate. What do you mean my access was revoked? She snapped into her phone. That account is under my name. Was. Then her voice rose. What do you mean it's not anymore? Who authorized this? Her assistant mumbled something I couldn't hear. Then she turned and saw me standing there. You, she hissed. What did you do? I tilted my head. I took back what was mine. You can't beat me, Mara. You were a placeholder. I was chosen. You're right, I said softly. You were chosen. By people who never realized I built the foundation you're standing on. Her voice trembled, fury bubbling beneath her calm facade. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Maybe, I replied, stepping aside. Or maybe I finally stopped making them. She stormed off toward the exit, her assistant scurrying behind her. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The board would get my notarized documents by morning. Isla's reign would end before the champagne from tonight's party went flat. When I got home, the adrenaline had already faded. I slipped off my heels, poured myself a glass of water, and noticed something strange. The front door frame had a new scratch near the lock. My mailbox was dented. Someone had tried to break in. I checked my security camera footage. A figure in a dark coat lingered near my car just before midnight. No face, no plates. Nothing stolen. Just enough to make me feel watched. I sat in the dark for a while, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. Fear was there, quiet, cautious, but it didn't win. Instead I played the voice memo again. Isla's smug tone echoed through the room. Mara's loyal. She won't fight. That's why I'll win. I let it play twice. Then I whispered, let's change that. The next morning I parked outside the Westridge Community Center, where the Board of Trustees was scheduled to meet. Isla's car was already there. Inside she was speaking confidently to the board. As acting trustee, I've streamlined phase 1 of the riverfront project. Her voice faltered when she saw me enter. I walked straight to the chairman, handed him an envelope and took a seat in the back. He opened it, eyebrows lifting. Before we proceed, he said clearly, this revocation directly impacts standing authority. We'll need legal counsel before moving forward. What? Isla snapped. This is theatrics. It's not official. It's notarized, the chairman replied calmly. And filed this morning. The silence that followed was thick and absolute. For the first time, Isla had no words. I stood quietly, gathering my bag. As I walked toward the door, whispers rippled across the room. She's back. I thought she was gone. Outside, the spring air felt cool and clean. I didn't need applause or victory music. The sound of Isla's collapsing composure was more than enough. But even as her world fell apart, I knew one thing. The fight wasn't over yet. Isla wouldn't go quietly. And I was about to find out just how far she'd go to strike back. The silence that followed the board meeting didn't last long. Within 24 hours, my phone started buzzing with blocked calls, anonymous messages and half-voiced threats. I ignored them all. I knew exactly who was behind it. Isla had always believed control came from fear, but she never understood that once you've lost everything, fear stops working. 3 days later, I received an email from the Daily Ledger, Chicago's biggest financial paper. We've received documents about possible fraud within Lawson and Vail. You're listed as a former executive. We'd like to confirm a few details. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The forged grant contract, the one Isla had doctored, must have leaked. Someone had sent it in. Maybe Dean. Maybe a conscience inside the firm had finally cracked. I agreed to meet the reporter, Lila Torres, at a cafe downtown. She was young, sharp-eyed, and moved with the quiet precision of someone who smelled stories for a living. She opened her laptop, scrolling through files. You didn't leak these. No, I said truthfully. Then someone did it for you. These signatures. She turned the screen toward me. They're questionable. We're having them verified. I looked at the familiar swirl of my name. The forgery. The trigger for everything. Lila leaned in, lowering her voice. If this checks out, it's more than a scandal. It's criminal fraud. Whoever signed this could face prison time. I met her gaze. Then you'd better make sure the truth gets printed. That evening, I sent her the recordings Dean had saved. Isla's voice, my mother's admission, the board's complicity. It wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping. By dawn, the story was everywhere. Lawson and Vail under investigation for forged contracts and internal misconduct. The article named Isla directly. It cited the forged signature, the falsified grant, and the transfer of funds under her watch. Within hours, the company's stock plummeted. That same morning, my phone rang again. Isla answered. Mara, she said, her voice trembling but laced with venom. You did this. I didn't, I said softly. The truth did. You think you've won. You've destroyed our name. No, I replied, calm and steady. You destroyed it when you decided loyalty was weakness. There was silence. Then a small broken sound, half laugh, half sob. You always thought you were the better one. No, I said, staring out at the gray skyline. I just refused to be your shadow. She hung up. That afternoon, the company issued a public statement. Effective immediately, Isla Lawson has resigned pending investigation. The email was signed by the board's chairman. At the bottom, my name appeared as co-founder. Later that evening, I drove to the edge of Lake Michigan. The water was dark, restless, and endless, a mirror of everything I'd been through. I took out the old walnut pen Dad had given me years ago, the one that said ML. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't vengeance. It was balance, the world finally righting itself. I started a new company a few months later with Ethan and a handful of people who had seen the truth and stayed anyway. We called it Arden Strategies, from an old word meaning great forest. Growth, renewal, rebirth. Sometimes reporters still ask me about Isla. The investigations dragged on, and the last I heard, she'd left Chicago altogether. I don't wish her harm, just distance. Every so often, I walk past the old Lawson and Vail building. The golden logo still gleams in the sunlight, but it means nothing to me now. The real legacy isn't in steel or glass. It's in the lessons carved into your skin after you've been burned and still decide to rebuild. That night, I stood outside my new office, city lights shimmering against the windows. My reflection looked back, older, stronger, unbroken. For the first time in years, I whispered to myself and meant it. I'm free. Because sometimes the people who bury you forget. You were a seed all along. Seedling.